My name is Aurora Whitfield. I'm 34 years old, and until that Thursday night, I believe stability wasn't something you stumbled into. It was something you built, carefully, quietly, without leaving cracks that could collapse later. That belief shaped everything: my work, my routines, my relationships, especially my judgment. Or at least, I thought it did. If I had $1 for every time my boyfriend Daniel called me reliable, I probably could have paid off my condo twice over. Instead, I was the one covering nearly everything in our life, because stability to me meant carrying more when the person you loved needed time to figure things out. Daniel was 30, charming in a way that didn't demand attention, but somehow always received it anyway. When we met, that charm felt grounding, soft, easy. Now looking back, I think it was something else. Something that knew how to avoid responsibility while still being admired for it. For the first year, things felt balanced enough. He worked inconsistently. Freelance consulting, short-term gigs, ideas that sounded promising but never quite stabilized. I didn't mind. I had structure, I had income, I had a plan. And I thought we were building something together. But somewhere around the time he moved into my condo, something shifted. It started small. Podcasts, short videos, conversations about masculine leadership and a woman's role in supporting a man's vision. At first, it sounded harmless, philosophical even. Then it got personal. If I asked where he wanted dinner, I was indecisive. If I suggested we plan something together, I was controlling the frame. If I talked through finances before booking a trip, I was thinking small instead of trusting his lead. I remember one night, standing in the kitchen, asking casually, "Do you want to host Thanksgiving here or maybe go to your sister's place?" He didn't even hesitate. Sometimes I think you ask questions because you don't know how to just trust a man to decide. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded so ridiculous I assumed he was exaggerating. He wasn't. 3 Saturdays ago, we went out with his friend Mason and Mason's girlfriend Bianca. Rooftop restaurant. Expensive cocktails. The kind of place where everyone pretends they're more important than they are. Mason picked up their side of the bill and casually mentioned a surprise weekend he'd planned for Bianca in Scottsdale. Daniel went quiet after that. I knew that silence. It wasn't peace. It was calculation. The moment we got home, he kicked off his shoes, walked past me into the living room and said, "You know what the problem is with you?" I leaned against the counter. "No, but I'm sure you're about to explain it." He turned, arms crossed, expression flat. Mason makes Bianca feel like she can relax, like she doesn't have to think about anything. He leads, he decides, he handles things. I frowned slightly. "Okay, and?" "And you make everything feel like a negotiation," he said. "Like I have to justify every decision instead of just making it." I stared at him. "Daniel, I pay for this entire place," I said slowly. "What exactly am I not handling?" He rolled his eyes. "Money isn't leadership, Aurora. Anybody can pay bills and still not know how to be a woman a man can rely on." That landed, not loud, not explosive, just precise. I felt something shift in my chest. "So that's how you see me?" I asked quietly. He didn't hesitate. "Honestly," he said, "you're not woman enough to stand beside a man who knows how to lead." Silence. The kind that stretches just long enough to make you realize this isn't an argument anymore. It's a reveal. "You really want to say that out loud?" I asked. He grabbed his jacket, checked his reflection in the hallway mirror like the conversation had already ended, and said, "Maybe a few days without me will help you figure it out." Then he headed for the door. I watched him, calm, still. And then I said, "Then go find someone who fits your definition." He laughed, actually laughed, confident, certain, like he had already won something I hadn't agreed to compete in. At 10:18 p.m., he texted me, "Staying at Mason's." I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Understood." That was it. No argument. No emotion. No chase. At 10:40, I called my friend Caleb. He answered on the second ring. "You good?" "I need your truck," I said. "Tonight." He didn't ask questions. By 11:20, he was parked outside. From 11:30 until nearly 2 o'clock in the morning, we packed everything Daniel owned. Clothes, shoes, laptop, watches, gym equipment, the random gadgets he insisted he needed for future projects. I photographed everything before it went into a box, made an inventory list, documented it all, not out of anger, out of clarity. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. By sunrise, 14 labeled boxes sat inside a climate-controlled storage unit. I paid the first month, covered the lock fee, closed it, and walked away. Back at the condo, I changed the access code, deactivated his garage remote. Then I sent one message. You said I wasn't woman enough to stand beside you. I took you seriously. Your things are safe through the end of next month. At 9:07 a.m., my phone started vibrating. At 9:11, he was outside, trying the code. At 9:14, he called. What did you do? He snapped. I leaned against the counter, coffee in hand. Check your messages. You locked me out? His voice rose. Are you insane? No, I said calmly. I'm done. And then I hung up. By the end of that first day, I had 26 missed calls, 9 voicemails, and messages from 4 people who had apparently decided my breakup was now a community event. Mason texted first. You really put his things in storage over one argument? I read it twice, not because I needed help understanding it, but because I was trying to decide whether people really heard themselves before hitting send. I replied, it wasn't one argument, it was the last one. Then I blocked him. Daniel spent the next 2 days cycling through every version of the same performance. First rage, then tears, then blame, then that soft, careful voice people use when they want to sound reflective without actually taking responsibility. Then rage again. One voicemail was pure fury. He said I was humiliating him, punishing him, trying to make him look small because I couldn't handle hearing the truth. Another was almost incoherent from crying. So broken up, I could barely make out the words beneath the choking breaths and long silences. Then came the calm one. I never thought you'd actually do this, he said, voice low, wounded, deliberate. That was such a cruel way to teach me a lesson. That one almost made me laugh. Because I wasn't teaching him a lesson, I was exiting one. And that distinction mattered more than he would ever understand. The next problem came on Tuesday afternoon, when he showed up in the condo lobby with the building manager. Apparently, he had told management I had locked him out of our home and was withholding his essentials. Our home. That phrasing almost impressed me. When I got downstairs, he was standing near the front desk in sunglasses and a neutral-toned matching set, like he had dressed for the role of wronged partner. There was a stiffness to him, though, a tension around the mouth, the kind that appears when someone is very committed to looking composed and is privately unraveling. The building manager, Paul, looked relieved when he saw me. Aurora, he said carefully, Daniel is saying he needs access to retrieve his property. I nodded once. I already arranged that. Daniel turned to me, voice instantly sharpening. You threw me out of my home. No, I said. I removed your belongings from my property after you left and made it clear you were done. His jaw flexed. I left for one night. I looked at him, then at Paul. I have documentation. I had brought a folder downstairs on purpose. Deed copy, utility bill, storage receipt, inventory list, photos of every box, screenshot of his text saying he was staying at Mason's, screenshot of the message where he said I wasn't woman enough to stand beside a real man. Paul took the folder and flipped through it slowly. The silence in that lobby stretched in a way that made Daniel visibly uncomfortable. His weight shifted. One hand moved to his hip, then to his side, then back again. Paul looked up. As far as building records are concerned, he said, measured and professional, Miss Whitfield owns the unit. This is not something the building can override. If property has already been relocated and documented, then this is a private matter. Daniel's face changed instantly, not gradually. Instantly. His eyes filled. His mouth trembled. Then the tears came hard and public, shoulders shaking, voice cracking so sharply a woman near the elevators turned to look. This is unbelievable, he said. You're trying to destroy my life because I criticized you. I didn't argue. I didn't correct his wording. I didn't defend my character against the theater of his pain. I just said evenly, your property is safe. If anything on the inventory is inaccurate, email me. Then I got back into the elevator and went upstairs. My hands were steady when I pressed the button. That surprised me, not because I thought I would fall apart, but because some part of me had still expected guilt, expected second-guessing. Expected the old reflex that told me to smooth things over, explain more kindly, make myself easier to forgive. Instead, what I felt was something cleaner. Distance. An hour later, his older sister, Rebecca, texted me. Did he really say that to you? I stared at the message. Rebecca and I were never especially close, but she had always seemed more grounded than Daniel. Less interested in performance. Less impressed by his charm. I sent her the screenshot. 3 minutes later, she replied, He needs to get off those stupid podcasts. I read that twice too, because it was the first message from his side of the situation that sounded remotely honest. Later that night, a mutual friend named Marissa called me. Off the record, she said, he thought you'd chase him. I sat down on the edge of the couch. What? He keeps saying if you were more of a woman, you would have fought for the relationship. He thought you'd panic, call him, apologize, maybe beg him to come back so he could set some new terms. I leaned back slowly, staring at the far wall. That clarified everything. This hadn't been a breakup speech. It had been a test. A dominance move. A strategic insult designed to trigger insecurity, force pursuit, and hand him the upper ground in the emotional negotiation he assumed would follow. A little humiliation. A little bait. A little experiment in whether I would abandon my dignity to prove I deserved him. And when I didn't, when I took him seriously instead of personally, the whole thing detonated in his hands. That weekend, he posted 2 stories on Instagram. The first said, "Some women collapse the minute a man expects softness from them." The second said, "Never beg for feminine grace from a female who resents being led." A man I hadn't spoken to since high school screenshotted both and sent them to me with one message. "You okay?" I looked at the stories again before replying. The strange thing was, I was. Better than okay, actually. Because once the noise quieted down for even a few hours, I noticed something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. No tension when I walked into my own living room. No low-grade dread humming beneath ordinary conversations. No sensation that every choice I made was being graded against some invisible standard I never agreed to. No fear that a simple question would become a referendum on my femininity, my worth, my ability to deserve love. I slept through the night for the first time in months. Not dramatically. Not as some big emotional milestone. I just slept. And when I woke up, there was no knot in my chest. That was how I knew the relationship had been worse than I had let myself admit. Because relief is sometimes the most honest emotion in the room. The next Monday, I signed up for a leadership certification program through work that I had been putting off for months. Every time I had tried to commit to it before, something with Daniel would explode. A crisis, a fight, a hurt feeling, a complaint about priorities. Some problem that somehow became urgent the second my attention shifted away from him. Funny how much room opens in your life when nobody is standing in it calling you deficient. I started making dinner without bracing for commentary. Started sitting in silence without feeling abandoned by it. Started noticing how much of myself I had been shrinking just to keep the peace with someone who only felt powerful when I was off balance. Daniel kept trying, of course. New numbers. Longer emails. Messages that began with accusation and ended in longing, or began with longing and ended in accusation. He had a real talent for making emotional whiplash sound like sincerity. One email in particular almost impressed me. He managed to explain that his words had come from a wounded place, that men sometimes speak harshly when they feel unseen, and that my cold overreaction had re-traumatized him. I read that sentence 3 times. He had called me not woman enough to stand beside him. He had expected me to chase him. He had tried to publicly frame himself as abandoned. And now he was positioning himself as the victim of my refusal to collapse on command. It would have been absurd if it hadn't been so familiar. That was the thing about control. It almost never introduces itself as control. It arrives dressed as standards, as wisdom, as wounded honesty, as what you should be willing to prove if you really care. And if you don't submit to it, suddenly you are cruel, hard, selfish, impossible to love. I didn't answer the email. I archived it, added screenshots to the folder, and kept going. Because by then I understood something I should have understood much earlier. Daniel did not miss me. He missed access. He missed influence. He missed the version of me who still believed that being patient with disrespect made me mature. By the end of that second week, the condo felt different. Lighter. Mine again. I bought fresh towels, rearranged the bookshelf, opened the windows one Saturday morning, and let cold air move through every room, like it was clearing out something stale I hadn't known was clinging to the walls. I stood in the kitchen with coffee in my hand and sunlight cutting across the floor, and for the first time since he left, I let myself say the truth out loud. He's not coming back. The silence that followed wasn't lonely. It was merciful. And somewhere beneath that silence, another realization was forming. Men like Daniel don't panic when they lose love. They panic when they lose control of the story. About 2.5 weeks later, Daniel escalated. Up until then, it had mostly been noise. Calls from blocked numbers, emails dressed up as emotional insight, vague posts meant to paint me as cold and unresponsive. Then he showed up at my office. I work in a secured operations building attached to one of our regional logistics hubs. You don't just walk in. There are badges, reception protocols, security logs, which is why the call from reception felt off. "Hun, there's a man down here saying he's your boyfriend," the receptionist said carefully. "He says he just needs 5 minutes." I didn't hesitate. "Ex-boyfriend," I corrected. "Please don't send him up." There was a pause. "Do you want security involved?" "Yes," I said. Before security even reached him, he left. But not without making sure I knew he had been there. He left an envelope at the desk. Inside was a printed photo of us from a trip to Nashville. We were standing in front of some mural, arms around each other, smiling like people who didn't yet understand how conditional that happiness was. Folded behind it was a handwritten note. I needed you to fight for me. You chose pride instead. I stared at it for a long moment, not because it hurt, but because it was so consistent. Every version of his narrative required me to be the one who failed. I didn't throw it away. I photographed it, added it to the folder. That turned out to matter. 3 days later, my supervisor, Derek, called me into his office. There was no tension in his tone, just curiosity. Is there anything going on I should know about? He asked. I sat down, already understanding. What did you receive? I asked. He slid a printed email across the desk. Anonymous account, no name, no real signature. It claimed I was unstable, vindictive, that I had illegally removed a dependent partner from my home, that I was emotionally unfit to manage staff. I didn't feel panic. I felt confirmation. I opened my bag, pulled out the folder, and set it on his desk. Everything is documented, I said. He took his time going through it. The original message, the storage receipts, the inventory, the screenshots, the office visit, the note. Every piece of the timeline laid out without emotion, without interpretation, just facts. After about 20 minutes, he closed the folder and slid it back to me. Handle whatever you need to handle, he said, and if he shows up here again, we'll trespass him. That was it. No lecture, no doubt. Just clarity. That same week, Daniel started telling people I had sold some of his equipment, camera gear, personal items, even a small box of family jewelry. None of it was true. And the thing about lies is, they require energy to maintain. Energy I wasn't interested in giving him. So I did what I had been doing from the beginning. I documented. I went through the storage photos, pulled clear images of everything he claimed was missing, and sent them to him in a single email. Timestamps included. Locations labeled. Everything you referenced appears in these images, I wrote. Please arrange pickup before the end of the month. His response came back an hour later. You're enjoying this. I stared at the message, then set my phone down. That had always been his assumption about me. That boundaries must feel like revenge. Because he couldn't imagine another reason someone would stop tolerating him. Then came the moment that shifted everything from exhausting to useful. Marissa sent me screenshots. Private group chat. Daniel, Mason, Bianca, and another friend. Daniel didn't know Marissa was done playing audience. I opened the images slowly. The first few messages were complaints. About me. About how I overreacted. About how I took things too literally. Then I saw it. I only said it because she shuts down unless you push her, he wrote. She was supposed to come after me. That's literally the point. My fingers stilled on the screen. I kept reading. If she just acted like a real woman for once, none of this would have happened. There it was. Not confusion. Not regret. Not even anger. Control. Clean, intentional, unapologetic. I didn't feel heartbreak reading it. I felt clarity. The kind that settles something final inside you. Because now there was no version of this where he didn't understand what he was doing. A week later, I went out to dinner. Nothing dramatic, nothing symbolic. Just dinner. His name was Ethan. 32. Physical therapist. The kind of person who listened without waiting for his turn to speak. The kind of normal that felt almost unfamiliar after everything Daniel had turned ordinary into. We weren't anything serious. Just conversation. Food, a drink. Halfway through the second glass, the door opened. And Daniel walked in. For a second, I thought it might be coincidence. Then I saw the way his eyes scanned the room. The way they locked onto me and didn't let go. He changed direction immediately. Walked straight to the table. Looked at Ethan first. Then at me and smiled. Not warmly. Sharply. So this is why you moved on so fast, he said. I stood up. Daniel, leave. He laughed. But there was something unstable in it now. This is what a real man looks like to you, he said, gesturing vaguely toward Ethan. Some rebound so you can feel like you're still in control? Ethan didn't speak, just looked at me, waiting, respecting the situation without stepping into it. That alone said more than anything Daniel had ever claimed about leadership. Leave, I repeated. Daniel's eyes flicked across the table. Then he reached for my water glass and dumped it. Not wine, water, which somehow made it feel smaller. Petty. Immediate noise followed. Chairs shifting, voices rising, staff moving toward us. Daniel's composure cracked completely. He started talking louder, faster. You think this makes you strong, he said. You humiliated me. You stole my life. You turned everyone against me. Security was already there. 2 of them. Firm, controlled. Sir, you need to come with us. And just like that, the performance shifted again. Tears. Voice breaking. Public distress. I loved her, he said loudly, and this is what she does. They escorted him out. The manager came over, asking if I wanted to call the police. I didn't hesitate this time. Yes. Statements were taken. Footage was noted. Everything documented. Again. The next morning, I filed for a civil protection order. Not out of anger. Not out of fear. But because by then, I understood something clearly. I wasn't dealing with a man who wanted resolution. I was dealing with someone who couldn't function without control. And the moment that control was removed, he escalated until something stopped him. So I stopped him. Properly. Legally. Completely. By that point, I had everything. The original insult. The messages. The office visit. The false complaint. The lies. The group chat. The restaurant incident. The voicemails. Enough evidence to tell the story without ever raising my voice. And for the first time since this started, I felt something settle into place. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. Final. Because there's a difference between ending a relationship and ending access to you. The hearing was 3 weeks later. Daniel showed up early. I noticed him the moment I walked into the room. Not because he stood out, but because he was trying very hard not to. Beige shirt, neutral slacks, clean, understated, the kind of look people choose when they want to appear harmless. Approachable, misunderstood. His posture was different too. Less sharp, less performative confidence, more softened edges. If I hadn't lived with him, I might have believed it. I took my seat across the room, folder in my lap, printed, tabbed, organized down to the smallest detail. I had paid for a legal consultation beforehand, not because I needed someone to speak for me, but because I wanted to make sure every piece of my documentation was airtight. It cost me $450, worth every cent. When the magistrate entered, the room settled into that quiet tension, unique to places where truth and performance collide. Daniel spoke first. His voice was calm, controlled. He said he had spoken emotionally, that he regretted how things escalated, that he had only been trying to communicate, to repair, to understand why I had reacted so harshly. He framed everything after that as confusion, as attempts to reconnect, as the actions of someone who cared. I listened without interrupting, because I knew something he didn't. The truth doesn't need urgency. It just needs sequence. When it was my turn, I didn't speak much. I handed over the folder. The magistrate began reading, slowly, methodically. First, the original message, the exact words. You're not woman enough to stand beside a man who knows how to lead. Then the follow-up texts, the confirmation that he had left. The documentation of his belongings being packed, stored, and itemized. Then the office visit, the note he left behind, the anonymous complaint to my employer, the accusations about missing property, the email responses with photographic proof, then the group chat screenshots. That was the moment the air in the room shifted. Not dramatically, but noticeably. Because intent is hard to argue with when it's written in your own words. The magistrate read the message aloud. She was supposed to come after me. That's literally the point. Daniel shifted in his seat. His composure flickered. He tried to speak. Said the messages were taken out of context. The magistrate looked up. What context, she asked calmly, makes this acceptable? He didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. The rest moved quickly after that. The restaurant incident. The police report. The pattern. Not one moment. Not one misunderstanding. A sequence. Clear, repeated, escalating. The order was granted. 1 year. No contact. No third-party contact except for legal matters. 500 feet away from my condo. 500 feet away from my workplace. Any retrieval of remaining property had to be scheduled and supervised. Daniel didn't look at me when it was over. He kept his eyes forward. Still, controlled. But the performance was gone. Because there's a point where even the most carefully constructed narrative collapses under its own contradictions. And that point had finally arrived. 2 Saturdays later, he came to the storage unit with an off-duty deputy present. I didn't go. I didn't need to. Everything had already been said. Everything had already been decided. He collected what was left. The only things he didn't take were a broken ring light, a few pieces of costume jewelry, and 2 artificial plants. I donated the plants. Threw the rest away. After that, silence. Actual silence. Not the kind filled with anticipation. Not the kind waiting to be broken. Just absence. Clean. Final. Work got better too. I finished the leadership certification program I had been putting off for months. 6 weeks after the hearing, Derek promoted me to regional operations lead, The raise pushed my salary just under $91,000 with a stronger bonus structure. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't celebratory. It just made sense. Like everything was finally aligning with the version of my life I had been trying to maintain all along. I replaced my living room set, repainted the guest room, turned it into a home office. Not a space waiting to accommodate someone else's instability. A space that reflected clarity, control, peace. Ethan and I kept seeing each other. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. No conversations disguised as tests. No expectations hidden inside accusations. The first time I asked him where he wanted to have dinner, he smiled and said, "You pick this time, I'll pick next time." Simple, equal, normal. It shouldn't have felt remarkable. But after Daniel, it did. A month later, Rebecca texted me again. "She's telling people you were threatened by his standards," she wrote. I told him standards aren't supposed to require someone to lose themselves. I read that message twice. Then I laughed. Not bitterly. Not sharply. Just lightly. Because by then, it didn't matter what version of the story he told. The truth had already done its job. Daniel never wanted partnership. He wanted leverage. He wanted a dynamic where he could provoke, criticize, and destabilize until I adjusted myself to meet whatever version of control he needed in that moment. And the second I stopped adjusting, he called me inadequate. That's not love. That's control wearing confidence and pretending it's wisdom. I used to think strength meant holding things together, enduring more, explaining better, trying harder. Now I understand something simpler. Strength is leaving when someone requires you to shrink in order to stay. Daniel said I wasn't woman enough to stand beside him. Turns out, I was woman enough to walk away from him.